What motivated you to write the book?
My mum and dad, and just all their stories. And I suppose now I've just got a greater appreciation of their stories.
Your mum and dad in person, or because you wanted to dedicate it to them?
Well, I suppose I didn't start off with that, but I always just, the story of Mum's brother dying when the Americans accidentally bombed Nijmegen always just stayed with me. And I actually wrote a very small story about it when I was doing my course. And I just wanted to expand on that, and then it just sort of grew. So using all their lots of little stories that they told us as well. It's probably after the beginning of the war, but it's before Holland was involved. And it's Anah's 11th birthday, and she's been sitting with this beautiful red diary. Well, it's just a red book, a leather book that her auntie had given her, who's now dead. And she finally decided what she was going to use it for, and that was to begin a diary. We talk about the night before the Germans invade and how they were allowed to sit up and listen to the radio because Hitler was telling the Dutch people how he admired them and respected their neutrality. And the next day, in he came.
And does she have much involvement with the soldiers themselves? Or
Yes, there is some involvement. When the Germans came in, they literally were going to come across the bridge. There was a couple of Dutch soldiers at the bridge, and they basically bombed the bridge to stop them coming, then got on their push bikes, as my father said, and come to tell everybody, oh, well, the Germans are coming. Right. There was no shot fired in Nijmegen, right, because it was just such a small town. The German presence in Nijmegen on the whole was actually quite okay. It was very respectful of each other. They were quite helpful. Anah makes friends with one particular German soldier who looks after them a bit. The story sort of follows Anah from when she's 11 till she's about 16. So it stops just after the war's finished. It also involves a Jewish girl, and they end up hiding a Jewish girl for a while. So I sort of brought a bit of that into it as well. But this young girl, Anah, has a lot of freedom and is not locked up. She actually has a lot of freedom, and actually gets involved in the war as a Dutch person, befriending some German people in actual fact, and also being divided between liking some German people and then knowing what they're doing to relatives in other parts of Holland. So I think in that respect the stories are different to Anne Frank, who's locked up in that entire time, and she has to rely on her own imagination and her own dreams and her own sort of confinement.
Did your father, like my father, have certain anecdotes that he told more than others?
Yes, probably, yes.
Are there some that you can remember?
Well, I always remember the one where they, a bit like with you when you're a baby in the cot, there was an explosion, and it was just I forgot, it was a little bomb that came between the houses, but just went between the toilets. And so there were people on both sides, so they had to put a blanket there because they had this toilet, like, is anybody in the toilet? To see if there's anybody next door, which was like that for quite some time, because that's just where it just went straight through that dividing line of their toilets and that sort of thing, you know. And also that Dad was in a big family, and he said his mother could make food go so far, but he said that if you sneezed, the little bit of meat you had disappeared because there was just so little meat.
But that part of Holland didn't have the hunger winter.
They didn't have the hunger winter because the supply line ended there, you see. They, in that respect, they did well food-wise. There was just a lot of bombing and people died because of that more than anything, you see. Yes, it's very close to the German border. By the river, the Ruhr River, and there's a big famous bridge going over there, and it's also the first place where the Germans invaded Holland. That's where they started from. I think it was good because I suppose in a way I knew my character and I knew what I wanted to bring across, and it was personal, so yes, in that respect it flowed. But the intricacies of getting a book published are quite demanding, as far as you've got to have certain things that have to be right, and I wanted to make it readable for older people as well. So by self-publishing I was able to make the writing bigger, and I included photos of my mum and my dad and something, just to personalise it. So,
Did you study writing?
I have only done a short course on writing. I've done quite a bit of university education where I've had to write, and I've almost, I think, at that stage had to unlearn things, because you know when you do English at school, there was the thing about lovely adjectives and adverbs and big words, and suddenly I've actually come around again and thinking simplicity is actually sometimes much nicer. I also read a lot. I belong to a book club, so I have a lot of girls that were able to read and edit and say, oh, Joanne, I don't understand that, I don't see why you're saying that. So I had some help in that respect with some good friends.
Do you use any Dutch at all in the book?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I use a...
With a dialect?
Yeah, look, I'm not really sure. I used a few Dutch phrases, and it's like leave Tante Miep. I also like die Tante Miep to start off with and that sort of thing. And yeah, just a bit of Dutch. Yeah, not a lot. My Dutch is not that crash hot.
Lieve Tante Miep, this is the 4th St. Nicholas Day that the Germans have been in Holland. The war keeps going, and the longer it goes on, the more Mr. Hitler takes from Holland. There's very little left for the Dutch people. I was sure the Americans would have freed us by now. Tante Miep, Johan might be 17, but when Josie and I sneaked down to the lounge this morning, he was right behind us. We found the 3 clogs, which had our individual names painted on them, beside the fireplace, and inside each there was a guilder coin, an orange and a zuurstok. Sinterklaas had not forgotten us this year.
Available like through the internet on Amazon and that, and I had a press release which goes to all the bookshops, so if people want it, it can be ordered because it's printed on demand. But I've actually sold about over 50 myself to younger and older people who've all actually very much enjoyed the story, and
So
I think enjoyed the personal.
There is feedback?
Yes, and it's been very positive,
Right.
which I'm glad to say. But I'm also looking at the school market, because I think it's a very easy historical book to read that gives you an idea of an era without having to labour through a large textbook or something. Again, I use my father's home because it was just above the river, and he said they could actually see the Germans coming in. So I use that house as part of the centre point. It's actually very good for young adults as well.
We'll all read it.
Yeah,
Don't get me wrong, but I mean,
so now, who am I addressing it to then?
oh dear, who are we going to address this one to? Because it's fine.
Yes, I was going to actually probably look at some of the librarians of the different schools locally and just sort of have it in their library and go from there. I've sold quite a few to also retirement places and their libraries and that, because a couple of the guys I sold it to, because I do a lot of work in nursing homes, and they come and see their wives every day, and they had been part of the war, and one guy had actually been in Holland fighting, and they both loved it. Because there's a lot of familiarity, I suppose, to them, and it's their era, of course, as well. Most of my life was New Zealand, but then we just wanted to change, actually, my husband and I, because I had been nursing, and I'd been nursing in the same small hospital, so we just came over here for a change and loved it, actually. And the Dutch shop was one of our first discoveries, actually.
So
Yes.
what was the process of writing the book? A lot of research first and then get started? Or?
Actually, no, it's actually fictional, as far as I used an 11-year-old girl who I suppose I think of as my mother. She starts writing a diary in this beautiful book that she was given by her Tante Miep. And so she addresses the diary to her and then talks about what's going on in her life.
So what percentage is fictional, and how much research did you have to do?
I did a lot of research because I wanted to get dates and everything else correct, and when the Americans were there and the Germans, and just how it all happened. I'd have to say almost 50-50. Certainly a lot of the stories there are of what happened to Mum and Dad and to other people. And then I just sort of created a story to fix that into it.